Wow, big crowd.
I know I speak for both of us in saying we're really glad to be here, and this is set up so we're going to ask each other questions.
That's great. You know, today, as some of you know, is pretty big in the history of American politics, the California primary. There's things happening in the news. Susan, what's happening in your newsroom right now?
Well, we thought today we would be covering Hillary Clinton clinching the Democratic nomination, breaking new ground, first woman in American history to be nominated by a major party for the presidency. However, we ended up covering that last night because the AP was surveying superdelegates and got enough superdelegates to say they were endorsing her, that she crossed that threshold last night. This was good for us. We're in favor of news. I think the Clinton campaign was not too pleased about it. And so that's one thing that's going on. We've got the primaries tonight. But you know, the main story today is the main story for most of this year, and that is Donald Trump, who has declined to back off the comments he's made about the judge in California being trusted to handle the Trump University cases. And this has caused, this is in the process of causing a meltdown in the Republican Party. You now have the most senior Republican in the country, Paul Ryan, the Speaker of the House, saying that his statement, the statement of the presumptive nominee of his party, was a racist statement. And this is, I've got to say, this is my 10th election. This is not the kind of thing we've seen before. How about in your newsroom?
Well, you know, that's a great segue. Not to something breaking right now. I think the ink's still wet of what today is going to bring in the future. But yesterday, on the heels of what you just said, Susan, about Trump, we broke a story as relates to brethren that we have in our media industry. BuzzFeed made an announcement yesterday through its CEO, Jonah Peretti, that they were not going to take advertising dollars from Trump, as well as the RNC, even though they weren't actually getting any dollars from the RNC. But we all can hope. The dilemma that we've had conversation the last 24 hours after we broke that story is sort of, what does that say about our industry? What does that say in terms of values that a owner may have, as we talk about centralization of ownership in the media industry, to be able to say, pick and choose which partners or advertisers or revenue that you would get it. And it's putting, I think, a lot of things for our own industry as well as for the American public and for the people here in this audience, probably dichotomies and dialects of tension that we've been having for a while. So that's one story that we were very proud of. You know,
nobody in our industry turns down advertising dollars without some thought these days because there are not that many of them. There's another story I'd like to mention that we've been working on. 2 months ago, we decided to create a database on lawsuits involving Donald Trump, either cases where he'd been sued or sued somebody. Who can guess how many lawsuits we found so far? 3,500. Now, when we called Trump's lawyer and said, you know, this seems like a lot of lawsuits to us, he said that it's part of the business world, that for people in the real estate business, moguls, that it's not unusual to be involved in a lot of lawsuits, and that is certainly true. So we took 5 other real estate moguls, Sam Zell, Peter Silverstein, some others, 5 of them, and investigated how many lawsuits they had been named in. And we found that Trump's lawsuits, Trump had been named either as a defendant or a plaintiff in more lawsuits than these other 5 real estate moguls combined. So that gave us some context. And we've done 2 stories off this database so far. We have a third one in the works, which was enough current concern to Donald Trump that he actually called our reporter back yesterday to talk about it. That's a story we should have out in the next day or 2. And I will say, whatever you say about Donald Trump, he is available to the news media, and that is a characteristic we appreciate. You know, if a reporter ever calls you, you might want to follow suit. Just give us a call back. Tell us about the audience that Politico is thinking about when you do stories.
That's a good question, and one of the things that, as we were thinking about this conference for myself and some of my colleagues, you know, people in this audience, besides the backdrop of Washington, the election, why is Susan and myself up here on the stage? And it goes to our audience, but it goes to something broader when we think about social innovation. I really do believe, I hope Susan agrees, that journalism is a laboratory for social innovation. and particularly political journalism of the kind that I've dedicated my career to, and the kind that we produce to the level of excellence at Politico, whereas there's a dedication to sort of the role that journalism continues to play, and hopefully will forever in time, around making sure democracy succeeds. And then as you think about the type of struggles that most media industry, most media companies are having right now in terms of how to develop a business model, the business model doesn't take away from the potential outcome and what's at stake with our news organizations. For us, one of the things that I believe that we've had since its founding is sort of a sense of shared purpose around this. A shared purpose that is tied to an audience. If I look around the type of people I know in this room who are developing stakeholder strategies to try to make the world a better place, make their company's reputation better, and work in very interesting public-private partnership perspectives. In the same ways, we're trying to make sure that we know we have a clear sense of who our reader is. If we look at the history of the newspaper industry, one of the things that has struck me as we look at it is that there was not a sense of shared purpose at the heyday, of the peak, right in the late 80s, or the peak of newsrooms, where the newsroom would measure by Pulitzers. Everyone loves a good Pulitzer now and then. But it would also measure it by circulation. And then the business team would be about selling classified advertising. It had nothing to do with the purpose of the journalism. We have that today. Brethren of ours in the digital media space are still divergent in their shared purpose. Instead of circulation, we have traffic. And instead of classified advertising, we have things called programmatic, for those of you who know the business model, or some type of network advertising. It's all reducing things to an algorithm, and that's not good. That's not good for the work you're doing. It's not good for our industry. So our focus is squarely on how do we serve the individuals who care about politics, policy, and power around the world. This notion of political influencers. And those political influencers who read our journalism are also the secret to how we develop our business model. It's the same considerations, that there's no role that we're trying to play of having multiple sections, multiple geographies, or any of those things. We have a sense of shared purpose that the people that we serve our readers to are also sources to our newsroom on their stories, and also how we develop a business model.
You know, it'd be hard to find, I think, two successful publications or two successful news organizations, I should put it that way, that are more different in terms of their audience than yours and mine, because you have an audience of political influencers. We have an audience that, for our print edition, reaches 2.7 million. We have a print circulation of 2.7 million a day, which seems like a lot until you look at our digital circulation. Digitally, we reach more than 50 million unique visitors every month on USA Today proper. We reach more than 100 million unique visitors every month on our digital properties across the USA Today network, which includes newspapers like the Detroit Free Press and the Des Moines Register and the Arizona Republic that are part of Gannett and that increasingly use integrated content with USA Today. And we think of our audience as being people, Americans who are curious, interested in their world, busy. So they're looking for, in often cases, a quick read on the news. They want to be up to date on what's going on, but they don't care about every single thing that happens. And they also, this has been interesting, with the ability to look at, with our analytics, at what people read and what they stick with when they go on to our digital platforms. They're interested both in the latest news, what's the thing that just happened, but they're also interested in our longer form journalism. So you think about the story that Nick Pinsenstaller and I did last week on this Trump lawsuits database. In the first 12 hours, that reached more than 1 million readers on our digital website, because we have this mix, people who have this mix of things. News right up to the minute, also willing to go in more depth. One way in which we're quite alike, though, it seems to me, is that journalists who can seem kind of cynical are in fact the most idealistic people in the world, because we are motivated by a desire to make our country work better, to make our democracy work better, to make the lives of the people we reach work better. And that is, I think, the reason that we got into this field.
And I couldn't say it better. And USA Today, for so many people in this audience, there's an emotional satisfaction when we're traveling. It's in front of us. And just like, oh, I got to read something and travel. It's there, okay. But not at all. But it's important. It's important. The horizontal approach that the importance of USA Today has done, continues to do, and then still from its journalism to be doing innovative work. Our approach is much narrower, and that narrowness was tied to originally the geography that Politico was founded upon here in Washington, and sort of having a set of individuals who founded the company from a newsroom background from the Washington Post, but really trying to disrupt or reimagine how Washington itself covered itself. Not that it was tied to a specific institution or a geography, but again, that the people that we serve are in our name. We are looking to reach politicos wherever they are. What's transformed, I think, over the last few years for all media properties is this idea of are you in the game for scale? Are you game for reach? Is it about engagement? And what's the right business model? There's sort of a pressure on a lot of media organizations who think that it's all some sort of deal with Facebook, that they've got to get as much traffic as possible with Facebook. We've taken the opposite approach. We appreciate what the surround sound around our journalism comes from social networks, but more importantly, what's the experiences that we can develop for our readers to both help them do their job from a utility perspective of information, but also serve as a form of inspiration. And I think that's the area that we hope that the depth in which that we're sort of focused on politics then surfaces something more important, which I think everyone in this room, that politics plays a critical role in how we look at society. Yet we haven't developed enough diversity of journalism or content experiences, whatever you want to call it, in terms of what is the role of politics in terms of how we think of our identity. What's the role of politics for you really to unlock the sort of public-private partnerships that need to happen from an urban innovation perspective? What's the role of the journalism to report on what mayors are doing around our country? It's something that we've dedicated a big section of our newsroom to focus on a series called What Works, and it's about urban innovation around our country. And a few years ago, we wouldn't have taken that on. We would have just focused on the horse race. We would have focused on what's happening in Congress. We believe that there's a role for a media company to serve at that intersection between politics and innovation and government. And hopefully, we'll be successful at that.
So let me talk just a little bit about what's changed in terms of our political coverage. As I mentioned, this is my 10th presidential election. The first one I covered was in 1980. I am just that old. I have no other skills, so I want to thank you all for continuing to hold elections, because it keeps me employed. In some ways, everything has changed about the way we cover elections. In 1980, when I was a cub reporter for Newsday covering that election, nobody even recorded, print reporters didn't even record what people were saying. We would all take notes, and then we would huddle afterwards and agree on a version of the precise quote, and we'd all use that precise quote so that our editors would not come back and say the AP has a different version of that quote, because in fact, we had gotten together and agreed on what it was this person had just said. Well, then we got tape recorders, and now when you're out, there is the distinctions among different kinds of reporters have really vanished, because our USA Today reporters are out there shooting video. We're on Twitter. We're doing stuff on Facebook Live. I'm going out to our headquarters after this to do a Facebook Live on what to look for at tonight's primary. Everything has gotten so much faster, so that it used to be that we would cover an event in the next day's paper, and then the day after that we'd analyze it, and the day after that we'd look ahead to the next event. We do all that now instantaneously. And the piece that I had planned to write tonight is on what Clinton and Trump need to do in the next 6 weeks from now to the political conventions. Well, of course, I ended up having to do that last night because of the whole AP thing. So that's something we posted this morning, but we are in a much faster process. It's also an enormously more transparent one. And that's one way in which social media has had an effect, because any event that I write about, you can see. You can see it on YouTube. You can see 60 different versions of it on social media. And I think that's made things harder for legacy news organizations like mine, but it's also created this huge opportunity, because one thing that we can offer that some other sources of news can't is trust, a feeling that the journalists know what they're doing, that we're trying to play it straight, that we don't have a big agenda. And that is something I think, you may have heard, you can't trust every single thing you read on the internet. This is something that legacy news organizations can bring to our conversation. Let me give you the last word.
No, that's really interesting in terms of what's at stake in our business, and I think it's the same thing as what's at stake with each of you. And in terms of how we have approached this election, I think there's three things I would say that are sort of initial thesis of how we're approaching it differently, which is one, that all news organizations, when they're covering the elections, sort of have the same stack of tools. They have a map. They're tracking the horse race. But there's also a very unique thing of an emotional arc that happens to moments around the elections that are similar to sports moments. And we've developed sort of a way for our journalism to sort of take on sort of a 3-day arc. So if you go to Politico.com now, I appreciate that. You will see this notion of a sort of a stadium-like experience around our content. And why it's important is to be able to understand of how we can, we feel like we're in a battle against the war against commodity journalism. If everything sounds and looks the same, then everything is just going to be sequestered to a Facebook feed. Instead, we want to create our own experiences around the diversity of journalism that we have with this large audience that are going to come to us, but then be able to present to them different ways to experience that information. And then how it relates to you is, I think, an approach that we're taking, which is that we're looking at our partners not as transactional advertisers, but almost as angel investors. Angel investors to help us think through of how to keep complete church and state, independent journalism thriving, but it actually intersects with concerns that you're looking to do. So what is that? Bringing highlight to influencers around our country, whether it's talking about urban innovation or telemedicine or thinking about sort of what does the global economy look like in 2020, what does the census look like? There are big issues that bring so much uncertainty. Our journalism should be able to do that, and we can only do that with the partners that we can attract.
Thank you.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you.